3 U.S. Navy destroyers, 96 vertical launch cells each, the most advanced radar ever installed on a surface warship, and Iran came at them with speedboats. Not cruise missiles, not submarines, not speedboats. Fiberglass hulls doing over 50 knots, armed with guns and short-range missiles that cost less than a pickup truck. The kind of thing you would see racing across a Florida lake on a summer afternoon. And for a few minutes, those speedboats almost won. Not because the destroyers were weak, not because the crews were not ready, because Iran did not build those boats to sink the destroyers. Iran built them to drain something far more valuable, and the U.S. Navy almost let it happen. Here is why this matters. An Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer represents the peak of American naval engineering, nearly $2 billion per hull. The Aegis combat system, capable of tracking over 100 simultaneous air and surface targets, 96 vertical launch cells loaded with some of the most expensive interceptor missiles on Earth, 4 gas turbines that can push 9,000 tons of steel past 30 knots. This ship was designed to defeat entire air defense networks, shoot down ballistic missiles in space, and dominate any ocean on the planet. And Iran sends fiberglass speedboats against it. That is not a mistake. That is the entire strategy. Because the question Iran figured out decades ago was never how do we sink the destroyer. The real question was how do we make the destroyer useless? And the answer fits inside a boat that costs less than a used car. The math behind this is brutal, and once you see it, you will never look at a naval battle the same way again. We don't cover the battle, we find the breaking point. If you want to understand the equation that almost handed Iran a victory, it never fired a real weapon to earn subscribe. That answer is coming right now. Type the word Aegis in the comments if you have ever wondered what happens when the most advanced warship on Earth runs out of the one thing that makes it dangerous. To understand why cheap boats nearly broke an advanced destroyer, we need to go back to a decision the U.S. Navy made in the 1980s. When American engineers designed the Arleigh Burke class, they built it around one fundamental assumption. The enemy sends a small number of expensive, high-value threats. The ship detects them from far away. The Aegis system fires precise interceptor missiles. The threat dies. One shot, one kill. That philosophy shaped everything from the radar array to the weapon loadout to the fundamental math of how the ship engages an adversary. The problem is Iran studied that assumption, and they built their entire naval strategy around breaking it. Siddharth Kaushal, a senior research fellow on sea power at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense, described the core challenge plainly. The ask for the U.S. Navy, he said, is considerably higher than for the Iranians. Iran does not need to score many hits. Iran only needs to score enough hits to convince insurers and ship owners they do not want to risk their vessels or their crews in the strait. The corridor does not close by force, it closes by fear. And fear only needs one burning hull to sustain itself. That is not a military strategy, that is an insurance strategy, and it is working. But how exactly do cheap boats threaten a ship that can track over 100 targets at once? The answer lives inside 3 numbers, and the first number is 3. The Arleigh Burke carries 3 fire control illuminators. 3. These are the focused radar beams that guide Standard Missile 2 interceptors to their targets in the final seconds before impact. Without an illuminator locked on the target, the missile cannot complete its kill. The ship can track 100 threats simultaneously, but it can only guide 3 interceptors to terminal impact at any given moment. Run the cost equation first. A Standard Missile 6, the most advanced interceptor in the destroyer's arsenal, costs approximately $4.3 million per round. A Standard Missile 2 Block 3 runs roughly $2 million per shot. The Nasr 1, the short-range anti-ship missile carried by many of Iran's fast attack boats, costs somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. Iran's basic composite hull fast attack craft costs somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000 to build and field. When Iran sends 30 boats at a destroyer simultaneously from multiple compass directions, the math stops working in America's favor. The ship can track all 30, but it can only guide 3 interceptors to terminal intercept at the same second. and every Standard Missile-6 it fires costs 43 times the value of the boat it destroys. The Navy did not design this ship to fight that fight. It designed it to defeat the Soviet Navy, carriers, cruisers, guided missile submarines, ballistic warheads, platforms worth billions of dollars, where a $2 million interceptor makes perfect economic sense. Iran does not have a Soviet Navy. Iran has 1,500 fiberglass boats and 40 years of patience. But the Illuminator bottleneck is only the first problem. Here is where the geography of the Strait of Hormuz makes everything exponentially worse. The usable shipping corridor through the strait compresses to roughly 6 nautical miles, 2 miles inbound, 2 miles outbound, 2 miles of buffer between them. That is the entire playable space for the most powerful surface combatants ever built. The Iranian coastline sits between 10 and 15 nautical miles from that corridor on one side, and the Rocky Mountains of the Musandam Peninsula on the other. A sea-skimming cruise missile launched from that coast, flying at wave height to avoid radar detection, does not appear on the destroyer's screens until it is roughly 8 to 12 nautical miles away. At the speed those missiles travel, that gives the crew between 20 and 50 seconds to detect, classify, authorize, and fire a response. Not minutes, seconds. And while the radar is burning processing cycles on the cruise missiles arriving from the coastline, the fast boats are already closing from the surface at over 50 knots, just a few feet above the water. This is the geometry Iran spent 40 years designing and refining. The Strait of Hormuz is not a battlefield the destroyer was built for. It is a trap, and every foot of its geography was shaped to favor the defender with the cheapest weapons. The destroyer was engineered for deep, open ocean, where the radar has hundreds of miles of warning time, and the engagement envelope spans the horizon. In the strait, that envelope collapses to seconds. CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper acknowledged the scale of this challenge when Iran launched its most coordinated assault yet against 3 U.S. Navy destroyers transiting the corridor. Cruise missiles from the coast, drone swarms from inland launch sites, and fast attack boats surging from hidden coves, all arriving simultaneously. His statement after the engagement was precise. He said the forces defeated each and every one of those threats through the clinical application of defensive munitions. Clinical application of defensive munitions. That phrase is doing enormous work, because what it means, in plain terms, is the destroyer's spent missiles. Each cruise missile that got intercepted cost $2 to $4 million. Each one that was electronically jammed and missed cost nothing. Iran launched the assault not primarily to sink the ships, but to drain the vertical launch inventory that every future mission across this theater depends on. A destroyer carries 96 vertical launch cells. Those cells cannot be reloaded at sea. They are welded into the hull at the shipyard during original construction. When they are empty, the ship becomes a radar station with a flag on it. Expensive, visible, and unable to stop anything that matters. In the first 100 hours of active operations across the theater, the U.S. military burned through an estimated $3.1 billion in munitions. The congressional allocation for the operational period was $178 million. That gap is not a rounding error. It is a structural mismatch between what Iran forces the Navy to spend and what the American budget planned to absorb. CNO Admiral Daryl Caudle put this directly to the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense in May. He told lawmakers that the Navy would need to start making decisions about training, operations, and certification events if additional funding was not approved in the near term. The most powerful Navy on Earth, running an emergency budget calculation against speedboats. That is not a tactical problem. That is a structural one that reaches from the strait all the way to Capitol Hill. Here is the part the headlines missed entirely. The destroyers survived. Every threat was defeated. And that did not happen by accident or through last-minute improvisation. It happened because the Navy stopped trying to solve the fast boat problem the way the destroyer was built to solve it. CENTCOM did not send 3 destroyers into that strait alone. They deployed over 100 aircraft simultaneously. Apache attack helicopters from Army bases in the region flew at 200 feet above the water, using their own forward-looking sensors and Hellfire missiles to destroy fast attack boats before those boats ever forced the destroyer to engage. Each boat destroyed by an Apache, was a target the Aegis radar never had to track. Each track it never managed was processing bandwidth redirected toward the cruise missiles and ballistic threats that actually justified the cost of the interceptor inventory. The cooperation between branches runs deeper than the headlines suggest. Army Apache helicopters do not organically deploy with Navy strike groups. Getting them into position required weeks of coordination between CENTCOM, Naval Forces Central Command, and the Army's aviation commands in the region. That coordination happened before the first boat launched. The fact that it worked under live fire is a testament to years of joint exercises and doctrine development that rarely make the news, but determine the outcome when it matters. Electronic attack jets from the carrier air wing jammed the active radar seekers inside incoming cruise missiles, causing them to lose lock on the ship's hull and fly into the water without a single interceptor being spent. Every missile jammed that way was a Standard Missile 6 that stayed loaded in the vertical launch cell, available for the hypersonic threat that might follow. That is not desperation engineering. That is layered American military doctrine applied under live fire. 15,000 service members, over 100 aircraft, multi-domain unmanned systems operating below the surface and above it, and the full architecture of American electronic warfare working in coordinated sequence to protect 3 ships transiting 21 nautical miles of contested water. Now stack all 3 pieces together. Iran designed the fast boat strategy to accomplish 3 things simultaneously. Force the destroyer to split its radar bandwidth between air and surface threats at the same time. Force the crew to make engagement decisions in under 50 seconds with incomplete targeting data. And force the ship to spend its finite missile inventory on targets that cost almost nothing to replace. None of those 3 things happened the way Iran planned. The Army helicopters took the surface fight entirely off the destroyer's radar scope. The electronic warfare aircraft made most of the incoming cruise missiles miss without costing a single interceptor round. And the few threats that penetrated those outer defensive layers were handled by Aegis exactly as the system was designed, with precise terminal intercepts against targets that actually justified the expenditure. Iran built a weapon designed to drain American missiles. America built a system that made Iran drain the wrong target entirely. The fast boats did not lose because the destroyer outgunned them in a straight exchange. They lost because the destroyer was never fighting them alone. Iran's swarm doctrine was designed for a single ship with 96 cells and 3 illuminators. What arrived was a networked kill machine distributed across 15,000 people and over 100 aircraft. The math Iran relied on assumed the destroyer fought as an isolated platform. American doctrine turned it into a node in a much larger system. The ceasefire is holding, barely. Iran has established what it calls the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to formalize control over the corridor and collect transit fees from commercial shipping. 26 vessels have been attacked since the conflict began. The insurance market remains effectively closed for most commercial operators. The strait is not open. It is suspended in uncertainty. And here is what Iran miscalculated. The fast boat strategy was designed to work against a navy fighting alone under restrictive rules of engagement. What arrived was a navy that had already done the math and built a combined arms answer for exactly this geography. The Army provided the helicopters. The carrier brought the electronic warfare jets. The destroyers held the center, while everything else held the perimeter. What America still has not resolved is the magazine depth equation. The production rate for Standard Missile 6 runs approximately 125 complete rounds per year. The burn rate of the first 100 hours of operations exceeded that annual production figure by a significant margin. Iran can replace its fast boats within weeks after any engagement. America sails home for months to refill its vertical launch cells. We answered the question we started with. The destroyers survived because the system was never designed to fight as individual warships. It was designed as a network, and the network worked. But there is a second equation nobody is asking about yet. The 5-layer defense that protected those destroyers required a complete carrier strike group, Army aviation assets, and 15,000 service members to escort 3 ships across 21 miles of water. Most of the time, that entire architecture simply is not there. In the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait, in the Bab el-Mandeb, destroyers patrol alone. 1 radar, three-illuminators, no helicopters, no electronic warfare jets, no 5-layer umbrella. The same multi-domain threat, one hull. If the math surprised you, the next equation is worse. The destroyers held, but the system that saved them needs 15,000 people. Most patrols, they are not there.